You know that one guy who always gets the girl no matter how out of reach she might be? I'm him. Being born with good looks has always proven beneficial to me. There hadn't been a Valentine's Day gone by since I was 14 that I spent alone. But what happened in high school made me cautious about dating. It was the final year of high school, and I was bored of the girl I had been dating for the past month. As Valentine's Day approached, I decided to spend the day with this new girl, Natalie, who had been sending me signals for the few days. Initially, I didn't plan on reciprocating her feelings, but the more I watched her, the more pull I felt toward her. I had to know what it was about her that made me so curious. After telling Bernie I couldn't see her anymore, I finally decided to date Natalie. However, I had heard from my friends that she had never dated before, which made me wonder how could it be possible for such a pretty girl to stay single till now. 3 days before Valentine's Day, there was a party at my friend Zen's place. I knew she would be coming there because some of his girlfriends were friends with Natalie. Upon arriving at the party, the first person in my sight of view was her. She was dressed in this slick, backless teal dress, which her luscious raven hair was complementing. I had never felt such attraction to any girl as I was feeling to her at that moment. I knew I had to ask her to be my Valentine that day, no matter what, so I began walking in her direction. However, before I could reach her, Justin, a sophomore from my school, approached her. He grabbed her hand and spun her around before she erupted in infectious laughter as he whispered something into her ear. Since my end goal was only to date her a few times before dumping her, I couldn't understand why I was so jealous that another dude was close to her. That was when another girl approached Justin and kissed him. I remembered seeing them together a few times on campus, so my guess was she was his girlfriend, which somehow made me feel relieved. I wanted to ask her out before any other guy butted in and swept her away, so I started searching for an opening where I could talk to her. But as I observed her, I realized she wasn't giving me signals. She was this way with everyone, and my dumbass misunderstood her. Even then, I was confident she would say yes, and when I noticed her leaving the crowd and heading toward the empty lobby, I started following her. She entered an empty room, and as she was about to close the door, I blocked it and got inside before locking it after me. Her surprised and panicked reaction felt charming for some reason, and I couldn't help myself. I pulled her to my chest and embraced her tightly. Her scent enveloped my senses. However, she pushed me with all her might and asked what I was doing. For some reason, I felt she was going to scream, so I quickly pushed her to the wall and put a hand over her mouth. She struggled to get away from my grip, but I was stronger and towered over her tiny physique. Being closer to her made me lose all of my senses and reason. I couldn't help trailing my fingers across her soft skin. The panic in her eyes shifted to sheer terror, making her resemble a prey who was about to be devoured by the predator. For some strange reason, I was enjoying it. I swept an arm under her legs and lifted her, my other hand grabbing her waist. She almost let out a yell as I threw her on the bed before pouncing on her and shutting her mouth. With each graze of her skin, shivers sparked in me, and I instinctively moved even closer, only an inch distance between us. She struggled, kicked, punched with all her might, but I felt none of them. Instead, I enjoyed touching her. As my tongue was about to delve inside her mouth, I felt a stinging pain in my back. Puzzled, I looked at her, whose eyes looked no more frightened. I noticed her hair, which was tied in a bun, now open. That was when I felt another stab, and the unbearable pain made me lose my grip on her. As she pushed me off of her and slipped away, I noticed her clenching a hair stick laced with blood, probably mine. Only then did I realize she had stabbed me with it. How did I not see her wearing that? As I wondered that, a cloud of black smoke started to spread across my senses, and the last thing I saw before blacking out was her escaping the room. I opened my eyes to a white ceiling whose color was fading away. Unable to comprehend what had happened, I continued staring at the roof in a daze. The concerned voices of Zen and a few other people I saw at the party caught my attention. They asked what had happened and who did this to me, but I was unable to respond. I couldn't think of what I should tell them. It wasn't like I could say the girl I thought wanted me, not only was she not interested in me, but I forced myself on her and got stabbed in the process. It was the first time I didn't get the girl I wanted, and also was badly injured by her. I was trying to think of what to do. I saw her standing at the end of the crowd and I heard someone say, "If it wasn't for Natalie, you could have bled to death. Thank God she found you when she did." As I stared at her, turning around and disappearing, I couldn't help but think, perhaps it was wrong of me to do what I did to her. And maybe, just maybe, if I took a different approach, I could have gotten the girl this time too. Hey guys, thanks so much for all this support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. Whenever I remember her, my heart is filled with happiness and grief. The one I wanted to be my forever. Memories of the days I spent with her now feel like an inaccessible dream. Her hearty laughter still plays in my ears like a beautiful melody. The warmth she imprinted on my body lingers at every inch of my skin. Even though my heart breaks into a million pieces every day in her absence, I've come to enjoy longing for her, for I know there will come a day when I will finally reunite with her. Even though I didn't want to be here, I was at this fancy, expensive restaurant whose even cheapest dishes were out of my budget against my will. I sometimes wonder why people make friends. Is that so they can be the sacrificial lamb in their instead? Like I was feeling at that moment. The more out of place I felt at that restaurant, the more regret I felt for being friends with Lance. As I was focused on the menu, trying to decide if I shouldn't eat and only let my so-called blind date order whatever she wanted for herself, perhaps I could escape the rest until my next salary. I heard a knock on the table. I raised my head only for my eyes to meet with a pair of green ones that were covered with shadowy makeup, making them appear even dreamier than they were. "Are you my Valentine, Marcus? I'm Natalie." Her slow, soothing voice met my ears, and I couldn't help but nod my head in the affirmation, although I was not the Marcus she was looking for. She gave a dazzling smile before pulling out a chair and sitting across the table. As I was mesmerized by her beauty, she was looking at me and apologizing for inconveniencing me. She said her friends pushed her for this date because they felt pity that she was always alone on this day of the year. Upon checking the menu, she hesitantly looked at me and asked, "Should we go somewhere else?" I realized she felt uncomfortable with overly priced dishes as well. Feeling a bit more comfortable in her presence, I nodded my head yes, and we headed out. She then suggested a few places nearby that served great food at reasonable prices, so we went to one of those. I don't recall what happened with my actual date or the real Marcus, but I sure remember turning off my phone so no one could disturb my time with this angel. We talked for hours while enjoying our meal. She was the one mostly doing the talking, and I was lost in her melodious voice. Her calling me Marcus made me feel bad, so I decided to come clean. As I told her what truly happened, she silently stared at me briefly before saying, "I know. I figured you weren't him since you weren't the self-centered chatterbox I talked to over the phone yesterday." After that, she just laughed, and I couldn't help but laugh with her. Fair to say, I had fallen hard for her. Before I met her, I never knew I could love someone. We started dating, and trust me, every second of my life that I spent with her was the best. We would record small things that we did and would watch them later together. I asked her to move in with me after 6 months of dating, and she did. I wished everything would stay like this forever. But little did I know, it was just my wishful thinking. That day when I was in the office, I got a call from her. But before I could answer it, my boss Rose asked me immediately to show her the proposal I was working on. It was weird since I had just started it 2 days ago and there was still time left until I finished it, but she made it sound like I was past my submission date. I had to re-explain the proposal multiple times, which made me feel she was deliberately picking on me. About an hour later, I returned to my desk, frustrated and exhausted. I grabbed some water and gulped it in one go before looking at my phone. It had 10 missed calls from Natalie. I tried calling her back, but her phone was turned off. I started getting worried, so I decided to head home early and see if everything was all right. However, when I went to inform the boss about it, she looked at me with a weird expression before saying, "No, finish your work before leaving unless you want to get a week's worth of your pay cut." Frustrated, I turned to my desk and started moving my hands as fast as possible. After every 10 minutes, I tried calling her, but her phone was still turned off. I started wondering what it could be that she called me so many times. I managed to finish my work in the next 2 hours, and this time I didn't go to the boss to inform her about it. Instead, I headed directly to my car. After about half an hour, I reached our house, but I tried to open the door. I found it unlocked. An unsettling feeling formed in my stomach as I rushed inside to find her. As I searched for her everywhere, a sinking feeling lingered in my heart that I couldn't shake off. When I entered her bathroom, my heart stopped upon seeing her lying unconscious. I rushed to her side and started checking for her pulse, and it was a relief that she was still alive. I immediately picked her up and dashed to my car. After carefully placing her on the seat, I started the ignition and rushed to the hospital. Upon entering the lobby, I screamed for help, and 2 attendants rushed to my side. They placed her on a stretcher and headed to the emergency room while I anxiously followed them. Despite my wishes for her well-being, I was too late. Half an hour after admitting her, the doctors approached me with a saddened expression and informed me that she couldn't make it. I asked them what was the cause, but they said they didn't know either. Her heart stopped for some reason. It had to be a mistake. When I checked, she was alive, and there was no way I could accept that she was dead just like that. I begged the doctors to save her, but no matter how much I pleaded and cried in front of them, they all kept repeating the same sentence. "I'm sorry, sir. There's nothing we can do now." When my boss Rose asked what I'd be up to this 14th of February, I couldn't say I would be drinking in my living room, sitting at my recliner alone while reminiscing about my ex-lover. To make myself look like one of them who would be getting some, I told her I had a date with a hot girl whom I'd met recently. I was sure she bought my lies. I mean, who wouldn't? I have a hunky physique and I'm over 6 feet tall, and just by hearing my voice, women swoop at my feet. Despite that, she had a bitter look on her, almost as if she was hoping I would say I was spending time alone that day. I couldn't care less about her feelings more than mine, so I went to my desk to finish up my work. There were times when I caught my boss's eye lingering on me more than they should, but I never thought of it much. Thoughts of Aria, the love of my life who passed away 2 years ago due to an unknown cause, had already occupied my heart, mind, and soul to think of another woman. However, I knew if I were to say that I was still hung up on her, people would think I was pathetic. That was why I would try to avoid others, thinking I was single, and would tell them every once in a while that I had a date. That evening, when I was getting off work, Rose called me in her office and asked me to help her with some work. I was butt tired and didn't want to do it, but after working here for the past 6 years, I learned that if you want to work without any trouble, you should never piss your boss off. So I agreed. The work she was making me do was mostly hers, which was piled up. It made me wonder if she ever even did them. Weirder was that she was not helping me finish up her shit. Instead, she just sat on her comfy couch. An hour went by and I was exhausted. That was when I saw her placing a cup of coffee in front of me and said, "Drink up," before returning to her couch. I was so frustrated that I wanted to throw the damn coffee at her face, but I controlled myself and started sipping it. Normally, drinking coffee made my sleep disappear, but that time it was doing the opposite. I started to feel even drowsier and didn't even realize when I passed out. When I woke up, I was having a throbbing headache, and as I returned to my senses, I realized my body was covered with bruises while I was butt naked. Panicked, I got up and scanned my surroundings, trying to make sense of what was happening. That was when I started getting minor flashes of what happened last night. I immediately got up, picked up my shattered clothes, and dressed up. And as I was about to head out, Rose entered with a seductive smile, which only felt disgusting and reminded me of how she forced herself on me last night. I stomped to her and grabbed her arms tightly before asking, "What did you do?" She acted shy upon my question and responded, "It was not just me who did it." She then slipped her dress, revealing the bite marks on her body. "Just don't call me Natalie next time when we are making love." The moment she mentioned my ex's name, I got enraged and grabbed her by the hair. "Next time you won't be alive if you try anything." As I growled that, she let out a moan, stating she liked it, but it only made me feel more disgusted. I turned around and dashed out of her office and then the building. Once I reached home, I went to take a bath. I tried rubbing her filthy marks off of me, but it was of no use. That evening, I typed in my resignation letter and sent it to HR. I started looking for a new job, luckily within 2 days. The pay was not as much as the last one, but it was still good. It was finally Valentine's Day, and I felt filthy every time I recalled the events of that night. I wanted to drown in my sorrow and forget about everything, only remembering my good memories with my angel. As I opened the refrigerator, I realized I had only 4 beer bottles and it wasn't enough to make me forget about what happened. I grabbed my car keys and went to the store to buy some more beer. After returning, I put on our tape and started watching my beautiful girl while drinking. That was when I heard someone laughing behind me. I turned around only to be horrified upon seeing Rose. She looked at me and said while holding her laughter, "Is that whom you had a date with? Your dead ugly girlfriend?" Her laugh was like nails to my ears, piercing and painfully, and before I knew it, I felt something red in front of my eyes, and the next thing I knew, I was sitting on top of Rose, rearranging her face. I punched her to my heart's content, but the psycho kept laughing and making an expression as if she was enjoying getting hit by me. I grabbed her by the neck and began choking her. She was still smiling, but when it started getting harder for her to breathe, she realized I wasn't joking when I warned her about killing her. As I saw her expression changing into a horror with each passing second as her feeble life slipped away, I started feeling better. I turned around and watched the scene where Natalie and I were dancing together, playing on the screen. Tears started slipping out of my eyes as I uttered, my voice barely above a whisper, "Don't worry, my love. I promise to be only yours forever."
So before this whole lockdown thing happened and my dating life went to hell in a handbasket, I used to swipe through Tinder and Bumble quite a lot, looking for girls to hook up with. So I'm bored in my Silver Lake apartment one day when I come across this absolute smoke show of a girl who was listed under the name Lilith. She had these big green eyes, wore pigtails a lot in her profile pictures, and had absolutely no qualms of showing off this big peachy butt she had. She also had this goth girl vibe going, which was something I find really attractive. I mean, she was definitely not the kind of girl I'd bring home to mom, but that's not really what I'm looking for when I'm swiping, so naturally, I swipe right. Boom, we match. I think I actually let out this involuntary "no way" when the old "it's a match" text appeared, and kinda cynically told myself, nah, she's a bot, this isn't real. But yup, it was real, and she was so cute to talk to. At first, anyway, because things started to go a little different when we actually met up. She worked at this coffee shop at the Getty and asked me if I wanted to pick her up after her shift so she could take me somewhere real special, which turned out to be the Museum of Death on Hollywood Boulevard. I mean, not my ideally romantic place to go on a first date, but like I said, she was a slam piece, and it was basically impossible to say no to her. So it was decided, and after I picked her up, she kept it a mystery for a while, only telling me to drive her to Hollywood Boulevard before revealing where she actually wanted to go. The area around the museum is kind of sketchy, but again, I'd have driven through way worse neighborhoods for a date with this girl, so I just pushed all my concerns to the back of my mind. Despite the interior being as dark and dingy as it was, looking like an over-clustered basement, the whole thing was actually kind of interesting at first. But I'd be lying if I said my eyes stayed on the exhibits the whole time, when they were pretty much glued to her butt whenever I wasn't going to get caught looking. It most definitely wasn't particularly creepy either, but the things that Lilith started to say to me as we were walking around the place did in a big, bad way too. Like I said, the exhibits were interesting, but that's all they were aside from being gross and spooky. There were death masks, body parts preserved in formaldehyde, all the things you might come to expect from a place called the Museum of Death, and then some. But this Lilith chick starts saying how pretty some of this stuff is, looking at it the way any other girl might look at a picture of a puppy or something. She then starts asking me all these weird questions about how I'd like to die. Yeah, how I'd like to die. I tell her I wouldn't like to die at all. I mean, it was legit the creepiest question I think I'd ever been asked, and she insists that everyone has a way they'd most want to die. I don't want to screw up the date or anything. She seemed crazy, and crazy girls can be real fun, if you catch my meaning, so I give her some throwaway response like, whatever way is most pain-free. She starts telling me how that was a boring answer and how she'd like to die of hypothermia because it apparently makes you feel all warm and sleepy towards the end. How some victims of hypothermia have even taken their clothes off before they died and just laid down in the snow or whatever before their heart stops beating. She also then gave me this long, in-depth speech about how taking another person's life would be better than even getting intimate, if you catch my drift. How that feeling of pure power must dwarf any feeling that drugs or alcohol have to offer. She then tells me how hot she thought it would be to watch me drown at the bottom of a pool while there's an audience and I'm totally naked. How it'd actually turn her on to see my final moments of desperation before my body went limp and floated around the tank. Then something about how the Vikings would make wings out of the skin on a person's back by peeling it off and spreading it out, calling it beautiful, how it was like art or something. When she's done telling me all of that, and I'm suitably freaked out, she starts calling me pet, and how she wanted me chained up at the end of her bed so she could do whatever she wanted with me. Now, any other girl, I'd think that was incredibly kinky, but after what Lilith had just talked about, I really didn't think what she had in mind for me involved any kind of pleasure whatsoever. When it came to driving her home, she actually told me to stop a few blocks away from her house because she didn't want me to know exactly where it was that she lived at, saying that you couldn't be too careful these days with all the psychos in the world who use dating apps. Yup, she said that to me after she'd spent like an hour talking about all the ways she'd want to die or how she'd watch me die. As soon as I got home, I blocked her number. I've never been more scared of anyone like that before, let alone a girl I wanted to hook up with. So, Lilith, if you're reading this, let's not meet again.